In the hot July heat of Willaband Plantation, being mean was normal. Mistress Evelyn Harrow was the meanest of all. Evelyn was famous in 3 counties for being beautiful, having a sharp tongue, and being good at punishing people who worked for her. She wore fancy lace and pearls, but her heart was as hard as the iron chains she made slaves wear. She got angry fast, thought up creative punishments, and was very proud, until she hurt the one slave girl she should never have touched. Her name was Solace. She was a small, quiet girl with big eyes and midnight dark hair that hung down to her hips. She was soft-spoken. She never fought back, never raised her voice, never begged. Evelyn thought that gentleness meant weakness. She thought cutting off Solace's hair would teach her a lesson. She didn't know that Solace had been raised by women who whispered old Louisiana folk magic, by a grandmother who could make a man fall sick just by braiding a lock of hair, by a mother who could reverse a curse with a bowl of boiled herbs. Evelyn believed hair was just hair. She would learn she was wrong. By the next morning, the entire plantation, slave quarters and big house alike, would wake up to a scream that shook the walls. Evelyn Harrow would stumble into the hallway, holding her head, realizing that half of her own golden hair had disappeared in the night. And Solace wouldn't look surprised at all. It happened on an afternoon thick with humidity, the kind that made the curtains stick to the walls and made people's tempers short like burning fuses. Evelyn Harrow stood on the back porch, fanning herself with sharp, angry motions, while the field workers were brought forward one by one for tasks, orders, or punishments. Solace was kneeling beside the porch steps, scrubbing dried mud from the mistress's riding boots. Her hair slipped across her shoulder in a shining ribbon, glossy, long, beautiful. Too beautiful for Evelyn's taste, too admired, too envied. Evelyn's husband had once said, passing by, "Pretty hair on that one, a shame slaves waste beauty." A passing comment, careless. No one else even remembered he said it. But Evelyn remembered. She remembered the way Solace quietly looked down. She remembered the faint tightening of her own jaw. She remembered realizing that she, a white mistress covered in wealth, felt threatened by a girl who owned nothing but her gentleness. And gentleness, Evelyn believed, was easy to crush. "Solace," she snapped. The girl lifted her head slowly. "Yes, mistress." "Stand." Solace rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. Her hair fell behind her like a dark waterfall. Evelyn reached out and grabbed a fistful of it. The other slaves froze. Even the cicadas seemed to stop their humming. "This," Evelyn hissed, tugging hard enough to make Solace wince. "Mistress," one of the older women whispered. Evelyn shot her a glare so cold the woman backed away as if slapped. The overseer stepped forward, unsure. "Ma'am, the girl ain't done nothing." Evelyn's eyes glittered. "That's enough," she breathed. She lifted a pair of shears from the porch table, long, steel, sharp. Solace did not struggle, did not cry, did not beg. She only whispered something under her breath, so soft, so low it sounded like a word carried by the wind itself. Evelyn paused. "What did you say?" Solace looked up, dark eyes calm in a way no slave's eyes should ever be. "A prayer, mistress," Evelyn mocked. Solace shook her head once, for balance. Evelyn scoffed and brought the shears down. The first cut was sickeningly loud, metal biting through thick hair. A long, heavy lock fell to the dirt at Solace's bare feet. Another cut and another. Evelyn laughed, high, delighted, vicious, while the slaves looked on in horror. Solace's hair, the pride she never spoke of but always carried like quiet dignity, fell in black heaps around her. When Evelyn finished, Solace's hair was jagged, uneven, hacked to her ears. The mistress stepped back, triumphant. "Now you look proper," she sneered. "Plain, forgettable." Solace touched the uneven strands, but her expression did not break. Instead, she lifted her gaze, slow and steady, meeting Evelyn's eyes with a calm so unsettling that the mistress shifted uneasily. "Balance, mistress," Solace murmured. "It always comes." Evelyn waved her away, suddenly irritated. "Get out of my sight." Solace walked toward the quarters, the other slave stepping aside, not out of pity, but out of something else, something colder, something wary, as if something had been disturbed, as if something had wakened. That night, the wind rustled through the cane fields, though the sky was still. The cicada screeched, then went silent, and somewhere near the big house, a shutter slammed with no storm to blame. Inside her bedroom, Evelyn Harrow brushed her hair, long golden waves she always called her pride, until sleep pulled her under. She did not feel the tugging. She did not feel the whisper of a voice. She did not feel the cold sweep of something moving across her scalp. But at dawn, the plantation would hear her scream, and Solace, standing outside hanging laundry, would keep her face perfectly blank. Balance had come. The morning after Widow Caldwell's tantrum spread through the plantation like wildfire gossip, Elise was told to bring breakfast to the mistress's dressing room. She carried the tray carefully: eggs, warm biscuits, blackberry jam, and chicory coffee. But every step tightened the knot in her stomach. Last night's humiliation was still fresh on her scalp. Every breeze touched her shorn patches like a whisper of cruelty. The door was already cracked open, which meant the mistress was awake and in a mood. Elise stepped inside. Mistress Caldwell sat before her vanity, brushing her long, honey-blonde hair with self-satisfied violence. The sunlight caught the strands, making them glow like polished wheat. Elise looked away, so she didn't have to see what she had lost. "You still look like a plucked chicken," Mistress Caldwell said without turning. "Good. Maybe it'll teach you not to attract the wrong kind of attention." Elise set down the tray. "Yes, ma'am." The mistress smirked at the mirror. "You know, the funniest part was hearing the overseer say you didn't even cry." She turned her head, eyes sharp. "Why didn't you cry, Elise?" Elise's hands squeezed into fists behind her apron. "I didn't think it would change anything." Mistress Caldwell laughed. "Smart girl. Pain is unavoidable. Tears are optional." She set down her brush and reached for a small ivory comb, her prized piece, carved with roses and lined with bone teeth so fine they glided through silk. She dragged it through her hair and froze. Elise wasn't sure why until she saw it. A single long strand had stayed behind, clinging to the comb's teeth like a pale thread of warning. Just one. But the mistress's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She murmured, plucking the hair free and watching it float to the floor. Elise said nothing. Mistress Caldwell resumed brushing, more briskly this time. Another few strokes, another pause, another strand caught, slightly thicker, slightly more noticeable. Elise felt her breathing slow. She hadn't touched this woman, hadn't whispered a curse, hadn't spoken vengeance aloud. But intent had weight in this world, and Elise's heart had screamed the night her head was shaved. Sometimes the universe listened. Sometimes it didn't need permission. Mistress Caldwell cleared her throat sharply. "Fetch me the rose oil." Elise did, placing the delicate glass bottle in her hand. The mistress tilted it, massaging oil into her scalp in elegant circles. Her expression returned to smug calm, until she brushed again. This time, an entire cluster of hair slid out at once, soft as a fall of feathers, gathering at her feet. The mistress jerked upright. "What?" Elise looked at the floor. 3 clumps of blonde hair lay scattered like dead petals. Mistress Caldwell scrambled closer to the mirror, fingers digging into her scalp as if searching for a logical explanation. Elise watched the woman's face drain of color. "Go, get Dr. Weller," the mistress snapped, gripping the vanity. "Now." "Yes, ma'am." Elise turned to leave, but paused as she reached the doorway. In the mirror's reflection, Mistress Caldwell was staring at the comb again. Her hands were trembling. She lifted the comb slowly toward her head, then stopped halfway, eyes narrowing with sudden sickening realization. She wasn't afraid of illness. She wasn't afraid of bad luck. She was afraid of Elise because Elise's hair had been taken the night before, and now hers was beginning to vanish in return. "Elise," Mistress Caldwell said, voice strained but pretending calm, "you didn't touch anything of mine last night, did you?" Elise met her gaze in the mirror. "No, ma'am." The mistress swallowed hard. Elise walked out without blinking, but as soon as she stepped into the hallway, she allowed herself one small smile, a curve of satisfaction no overseer, no mistress, no man on that cursed land had ever seen from her. Because the truth was simple. She didn't need spells. She didn't need dolls, charms, powders, or whispered hexes. All she needed was balance, and balance had a way of finding the guilty. Mistress Caldwell would learn that before the week was out, and Elise would be there to watch every strand fall. The sun rose pale over the plantation the next morning, casting weak light across the rows of cotton that shivered in the early breeze. For Laya, the girl whose hair had been taken in cruel jest, waking was like surfacing from a nightmare with no memory of drowning. Her scalp ached, tender to the touch, and her eyes flicked to the mirror propped against the washhouse wall. She gasped. Half of her hair was gone, shorn close to the scalp, uneven and ragged, strands falling like fallen corn silk across her shoulders. For a moment, the world tilted. She remembered the night before only as a blur, her mistress laughing, a sharp blade, a cruel snatch of hair. Now the evidence of humiliation stared back at her. The other girls in the quarters were watching quietly. Some tried to mask their fear, but others couldn't contain a soft gasp. Laya's closest companion, Mavis, stepped forward, eyes wide. "She really did it," she whispered, voice trembling. Laya pressed her hands to her head, feeling the jagged edges. But inside, something began to stir. Anger, sharp and precise, cut through the haze of embarrassment and shame. This was not just a theft of hair. It was a theft of dignity, of identity, and Laya knew she could not let it stand. The day began as usual, with the overseer calling the slaves to the fields. Laya walked silently, her shortened hair hidden beneath a faded scarf. But her mind raced. Every glance from the mistress, every casual smirk, fueled her resolve. By midday, she had formulated a plan, a silent, meticulous revenge that would make the mistress think twice before ever touching another slave's hair. The work itself was grueling. Cotton scratched against her skin, sun burned her back. But Laya moved with purpose. Each row passed. She observed meticulously every angle of the property, every opportunity. The overseer, a cruel man with little patience, barked orders, but she ignored him, focused entirely on what she would do. At the quarters, whispers circulated. Other girls noted Laya's unusual calm, the way her hands did not tremble, the steady gleam in her eye. She spent her evenings quietly gathering small tools, a needle, thread, some scraps of cloth, items the mistress would never notice her taking. By night, she was ready. The first opportunity came the very next night. The mistress had retired early, tired from entertaining some visiting planters, and the house was quiet. Laya moved like a shadow, her shortened hair brushing against the floorboards. Every step careful, calculated, she approached the room where the mistress kept her personal belongings, the same room where she had wielded scissors over Laya's head. Inside, the room smelled of lavender and powder. The mistress's vanity table gleamed, and among the trinkets and jewelry, Laya spotted a small, delicate comb. It was ornate, the kind used not for grooming but for show, her mistress's pride. She took it slowly, turning it over in her hands, imagining the way her own pride had been taken from her. Laya paused, thinking of the blade that had taken her hair, the cruel laughter that had followed. But she did not act rashly.
She would wait, watch, and when the time was right, the mistress would understand the price of her cruelty. That night, the plantation slept, unaware of the storm that had quietly taken root in the quarters. Laya's hair may have been taken, but her spirit, once caged, was beginning to awaken, sharp as the edge of a well-kept knife. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Laya moved through the plantation as though she were invisible, her scarf still hiding the jagged remnants of her hair. The mistress continued her cruel parade of remarks and condescending glances, unaware that the girl she had humiliated was no longer the timid, frightened creature she had once been. Every morning, Laya rose before dawn. She began small, observing, noting schedules, memorizing the movements of the household, the guards, the overseer. Each detail, each routine became a piece of a larger plan. She spoke little, but her mind raced like a caged hawk, circling and striking in thought before ever landing in action. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the cotton fields, painting everything in shades of fire and blood, Laya found herself in the laundry room, surrounded by steam and the smell of lye. Here she could move unseen, here she could prepare. She sorted through linens, noting the softest cloths, the ones the mistress treasured for her personal use. Each piece would serve a purpose soon. The other slaves watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. They knew she was planning something, though no one dared ask. Laya's eyes caught Mavis in the corner, her face pale, her hands fidgeting with a hymn.
"Everything will be fine," Laya said softly, the words a promise more than reassurance. Mavis nodded, uncertain whether to believe her or fear her even more. That night, the mistress retired early again, this time after complaining about a minor oversight in the household. Laya watched from the shadows as her target moved through the hall, unaware, a candle flickering in her delicate hand. Every step, every subtle creak of the floorboards was recorded in Laya's mind. This was her theater now, and the mistress was the unwitting actress in her scene. Laya had prepared the tools carefully: a small vial of powdered lye, a thin silk scarf, and a few sharp pins, each placed with deliberate care in the folds of her dress. She waited until the house was silent, every servant and overseer accounted for in distant rooms. Then she moved. Her approach was silent, measured. She paused outside the mistress's chamber, listening to the slow, uneven rhythm of her breathing. The door was slightly ajar, a mistake the mistress would not repeat, though it would be too late by then. Laya slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of lavender and candle wax, the air thick with complacency. The mistress was seated at her vanity, brushing her long, perfect hair. She hummed softly, a tune Laya recognized from the last day she had been mocked. The girl's heart thudded in rhythm with her own resolve. No trembling hands, no panicked retreat, only purpose. Laya reached for the tools hidden beneath her sleeve. The scarf was first, wrapping carefully around the mistress's wrists as she worked. The woman barely noticed, distracted by the reflections in her gilded mirror. Then came the pins, placed with precision. No excess, no slip. Each one was a reminder of the power now held in Laya's hands. Finally, the vial of powdered lye. Laya sprinkled it carefully into the basin of warm water the mistress used to wash her hands. Just a pinch, enough to sting, to shock, to make her mistress understand that every action carried consequences. The mistress dipped her hands into the water, letting out a sharp gasp as the chemical burned. Her scream filled the room, echoing against the walls lined with mirrors. Laya stepped back, silent, watching the woman flinch and stumble, realizing for the first time the helplessness she had inflicted on others. Laya did not flee. She stood tall, scarf still loosely binding the mistress's wrists. "This is what it feels like," she whispered, almost softly, "to have someone else's power over you, to be at the mercy of someone who knows your weakness." The mistress's face twisted in shock, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She had expected rebellion from the quarters, perhaps a whispered insult, maybe a broken dish, but never this. Never a calculated strike. Never the humiliation returned tenfold, matched with precision and planning. Laya removed the scarf and pins as the mistress fell back into her chair, trembling. The room smelled sharply of lie and fear. Laya's own pulse was steady, the first tremor of relief flowing through her. She had taken her first step toward reclaiming her dignity. She stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as she had entered, leaving the mistress to her shock and her own reflection in the mirror. Outside, the cotton field swayed in the evening breeze, unaware of the storm that had already struck within the house. By the next morning, word had begun to spread, though in whispers and cautious glances. The mistress, humiliated and furious, had told no one exactly what had happened in her chamber, fearing that the truth might reveal her vulnerability. But servants and overseers noticed the tremor in her hands, the haunted look in her eyes, the way she flinched at every small sound. The mansion itself seemed to sigh with tension, as if it knew its mistress was no longer untouchable. Laya, for her part, moved quietly, blending back into the routine of her work. She scrubbed floors, folded linens, and carried baskets of laundry, all while plotting the next phase of her subtle, insidious revenge. She had tasted power, and it had ignited a fire she couldn't extinguish. But she also knew she had to be careful. One misstep, one careless glance, and the mistress would retaliate with cruelty far worse than a mere burned hand. Over the next days, Laya observed, memorizing the rhythms of the household. She noticed when the mistress retired early, when the overseer left his post unattended, and when the cooks were distracted with their preparations for feasts. Every routine offered an opportunity. Every lapse could be exploited. The other slaves began to notice a change in her, a new confidence that was both inspiring and frightening. Quietly, they followed her lead, helping to gather materials, observing without speaking, aware that the slightest hint of betrayal could undo the careful web Laya was weaving. Her control was subtle but absolute. She was no longer just a victim. She had become the shadow at the edge of their master's vision, the quiet force that could disrupt without a sound. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows lengthened, Laya prepared her next move. She had learned that the mistress had a secret, a small drawer in her vanity where she kept her jewelry, letters, and other tokens of vanity and influence. It was a drawer that had been passed down through generations, never locked, always assumed to be untouchable. Laya had memorized its contents, letters from wealthy suitors, trinkets from her family, and a small sealed envelope marked with the family crest. Tonight she would take it, not for greed, but for leverage. She would prove that the mistress's world, so carefully constructed, was not as secure as she believed. As darkness fell, Laya approached the room with the quiet grace of a stalking cat. She slipped past the servants' quarters, avoiding the creaking floorboards, her pulse steady. The house was asleep, or at least it pretended to be, lulled by the usual routines of a plantation at night. Inside the mistress's chamber, the air was cool and still. The faint smell of lavender lingered, mingling with candle wax and polished wood. Laya knelt by the vanity, fingers brushing against the delicate carvings, feeling the smooth surface under her hands. The drawer was locked with a small brass key, which had been carelessly left in the ring of keys beside the dresser. She retrieved it silently, listening for any sign of disturbance. The drawer opened with a quiet click. Inside lay the collection of letters and trinkets, just as she had remembered. She carefully pulled out the envelope with the family crest. Its paper was thick, elegant, and carried a faint scent of lavender and rosewater. Laia tucked it into her dress, feeling the weight of its potential like a stone against her chest. As she rose to leave, a sound froze her in place. A faint creak behind her. The mistress had awakened earlier than expected and was now standing in the doorway, eyes wide with fury and shock. For a moment, the two of them froze, the silence thick and heavy. The mistress, realizing the breach, raised her hand to call out. But Laia was faster. "Don't," Laia whispered, voice calm but laced with authority. "You've had your fun for long enough." The mistress recoiled, uncertainty flickering across her face. She was accustomed to commanding, to having her every whim obeyed without question. This moment, however, was different. For the first time, she was unarmed against someone she had considered powerless. Laia stepped closer, her presence unwavering. "This is your warning," she said softly. "I take only what I need, but next time you won't see it coming." She turned and slipped into the shadows, leaving the mistress frozen, staring at the empty drawer and the echo of Laia's departing footsteps. Outside, the night air was crisp and filled with the distant sounds of the plantation settling into sleep. Laia paused for a moment, feeling the thrill of victory mingled with the responsibility of her newfound agency. She was no longer the girl who had awakened bald, powerless, and humiliated. She was a force, and the plantation, with all its secrets and cruelty, had begun to bend beneath her silent dominion. From that night on, the balance of power had shifted. Laia moved through the halls and fields with a quiet confidence, her every action measured, her every plan unfolding like the careful strokes of a master painter. The mistress, humiliated and wary, began to second-guess every step, every glance, every decision. And for the first time, the other slaves saw a spark of hope. That even in the heart of oppression, cunning, patience, and courage could change everything.
The days after Laia's daring act passed with a tense rhythm. The mistress moved cautiously, every step calculated, every glance wary. Laia, meanwhile, had settled into a rhythm of observation, patience, and quiet power. She had tasted the thrill of control, and now she hungered for more. Her mind was always turning, calculating the vulnerabilities of the household, weighing risks, and mapping opportunities. It began with small things: misplaced silver spoons, letters that disappeared only to reappear in different hands, whispers of secrets told in confidence that never reached their intended ears. The other slaves noticed her subtle manipulations and began to follow her lead, silently coordinating without speaking, understanding that their survival and advantage now rested in Laia's cunning. The air of fear that had surrounded the mistress was palpable, a tension that seeped into the walls of the mansion itself. One afternoon, the mistress summoned her household for a dinner gathering, eager to display control and command respect. Laia, assigned to serve the meal, moved with deliberate slowness, her every action observed but seemingly harmless. The food was arranged meticulously, the drinks poured with precision. Yet underneath the polished surface, Laia had engineered little disruptions, tiny but noticeable, that slowly undermined the gathering. A candle knocked over, spilling wax across the table, forcing guests to jump back in alarm. A carefully dropped silver fork created a moment of chaos. Laia's eyes flicked to the mistress, who attempted to maintain composure but visibly tensed. The guests, unaware of the subtleties at play, laughed nervously, exchanging glances. Their hostess's composure, once flawless, was now fragile. Laya moved among them, her presence almost unnoticed, but her influence spreading like a silent tide. That night, as the household settled, Laya convened a secret meeting in the laundry quarters. Only a select few were called, trusted slaves who had proven themselves discreet, capable, and cunning. They gathered around the small fire, listening intently as Laya laid out her plan. "We've been pushed, humiliated, treated like we don't exist," she began, her voice low but steady. "But now we have a chance to reclaim what's ours. Not through violence, but through control, through knowledge, through influence. We are stronger than they think, we are smarter than they believe, and we can bend this place to our will, one careful move at a time." The others nodded, understanding the weight of her words. There was no mistaking her vision. She intended to destabilize the mistress completely, not just for revenge, but to carve out a space of power and security for the oppressed in the household. Over the next weeks, Laya executed her strategies with precision. Letters were intercepted, rewritten, or misplaced. Secrets were whispered in the right ears at the right times, creating tension and confusion. She orchestrated small but effective embarrassments, stains on the mistress's gowns, ruined pastries, missing items. Each act was calculated to chip away at the aura of control that the mistress had so carefully maintained. By the month's end, the household was in subtle chaos. The mistress's authority had been undermined without overt confrontation. She moved through her own home with unease, second-guessing every decision, every glance, every command. Guests noted the slight tremor in her voice, the tension in her posture, and whispered among themselves about the mysterious decline in her composure. Lila, observing all this from the shadows, felt a sense of triumph. But she knew this was only the beginning. The real power came not from mere mischief, but from the knowledge that she now held sway over those who once wielded absolute control. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Laya stood in the empty hallway of the mansion, feeling the weight of her influence. She could hear the mistress pacing above, the quiet footsteps of other servants in the distance, the muffled conversations of the overseer plotting his next steps. Every sound reinforced her awareness of the control she now held. Laya smiled faintly, a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. She knew that soon she would not just be surviving within the household, she would be shaping it. Every act, every plan, every calculated move brought her closer to mastery. The days of fear and humiliation were behind her. Now the mansion belonged to those who could see, think, and act without fear. As the night deepened, Laya retired to her quarters, her mind alive with possibilities. Each creak of the floorboards, each flicker of candlelight, each whisper of the wind outside became part of her calculations. She had learned to move unseen, to act unnoticed, and to bend circumstances to her will. Tomorrow, she would begin the next stage of her plan. And the mistress, no matter how clever or cruel, would be powerless to stop her. The power dynamic of the household had shifted irreversibly, and Laya, once a victim of spite and cruelty, had become a force of quiet, undeniable authority. The days following Laya's subtle takeover were marked by an almost eerie calm. The mistress moved like a shadow of her former self, her presence at once demanding yet fragile, her commands more hesitant, her authority slowly eroding. Laya watched everything, noting the slightest tremor in the mistress's voice, the missteps in her gestures, the silent miscommunications between her staff. Each small error was a tool, each hesitation a lever she could pull. Laya had become the unseen hand that guided the household. She no longer merely reacted to the mistress's whims. She anticipated them, manipulated them, and slowly twisted the very fabric of the mansion to her advantage. Every movement,
Every act of servitude, every whispered word had a purpose. Her first act that week was to take control of the household schedules. She had spent hours memorizing the mistress's routines, the overseer's habits, the patterns of the kitchen and the laundry. With careful planning, she began shifting tasks, delaying reports, misplacing items, so that the mistress's instructions were executed imperfectly, creating the appearance of chaos without any direct confrontation. During breakfast, the mistress instructed a servant to fetch the silver from the safe. Laya, knowing the keys were never far from her grasp, ensured the silver was hidden in a spot the servant could not find. The servant returned, flustered, apologizing repeatedly. The mistress's temper flared, and Laya, ever the calm observer, handed the silver to the servant at just the right moment, appearing helpful and competent, while the mistress's composure crumbled before the eyes of all assembled. By midweek, Laya had begun cultivating quiet alliances among the household staff. She identified those who felt overlooked, mistreated, or undervalued, and she offered them subtle encouragement, guiding their actions to serve her overarching plan. These small acts of empowerment created loyalty without overt command, an invisible army forming within the mansion, bound not by fear, but by respect and shared purpose. One afternoon, a wealthy visitor arrived, a distant relative of the mistress, expecting the usual polished reception. Laya ensured that everything seemed perfect on the surface, the floor swept, the table set, the servants attentive. Yet beneath this facade, minor disruptions were orchestrated. A candle leaned too close to the tablecloth, spilling wax at the precise moment a toast was to be made. A silver knife slipped, glinting dangerously, causing a moment of fright and awkward laughter. The visitor, unaware of the deliberate nature of these events, commented on the odd tension in the household, while the mistress's blush betrayed her embarrassment. Laya, meanwhile, moved among the servants quietly, her calm demeanor contrasting the growing unease of the mistress. She whispered suggestions, offered small hints of correction, and ensured that any mistake could be turned into an opportunity. Each minor chaos further weakened the mistress's authority, while Laya's reputation as competent and composed spread through the household. Night brought new opportunities. The mistress would retire, exhausted and frustrated, while Laya convened her small circle of allies. They huddled in the laundry quarters, the faint glow of a single candle illuminating determined faces. Laya outlined the next stage of her plan, control not just of the household routines, but of the information flowing through the mansion. Every letter, every note, every whisper would be filtered through her. She would know what the mistress planned before the mistress herself did, and the entire household would bend to her knowledge. Her allies listened, nodding in agreement. They had seen the power of patience, subtlety, and intelligence. They had witnessed the mistress's decline, and they trusted Laya to lead them. By the end of the week, Laya had begun redirecting the flow of goods and communication in the house. Deliveries were received at slightly altered times. Messages passed between rooms with careful editing, and the mistress's orders often arrived in altered form, creating confusion and delay. Yet Laya always appeared helpful, ready with solutions, always calm and composed.
The mistress, once proud and imperious, began to doubt herself at every turn. She whispered complaints to the overseer, who himself was confused by the sudden shift in the household dynamics. The servants, following Laya's subtle guidance, appeared loyal but acted in ways that steadily undermined her control. One night, as the mansion slept under a crescent moon, Laya walked the hallways alone. The air was thick with the scent of candle wax, wood polish, and the faint trace of fear lingering in the mistress's quarters. Laya paused outside the mistress's bedroom door, listening to the slow, uneven breaths of the woman who had once ruled the house with iron authority. A small smile tugged at Laya's lips. The power she had longed for, the control she had patiently built, was nearly complete. The mistress, once untouchable, now trembled in the presence of a quiet, calculated force that could neither be confronted nor predicted. Laya whispered into the dark, a vow to herself. Every step, every day, every breath, I will shape this house, and no one will ever see me coming. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a soft symphony of shadows and whispers, carrying with it the knowledge that the mansion's true ruler was no longer the one who bore a name or title, but the one who had learned patience, cunning, and the art of unseen power. The days grew longer, and the mansion seemed to bend more fully under Laya's invisible hand. The mistress, once quick to command and slow to forgive, now hesitated with every word, every motion, every glance. Laya moved through the hallways like a shadow of purpose, orchestrating each detail of the household with precision, while the mistress felt the walls of her authority crumble silently around her. It began with small things. Meals arrived at unexpected times. Letters were delivered with subtle alterations, their contents creating confusion and delays. Servants carried out tasks slightly off-kilter, but always appearing to follow the mistress's orders. Every minor disruption was a thread in a growing web, and Laya held the loom. The mistress had begun to question her own memory. She called the overseer repeatedly, demanding explanations. But even he found it difficult to pinpoint the source of the constant errors. And every time he looked to Laya for guidance, she offered help, quiet, measured, unassuming, but always in a way that strengthened her position. One evening, a wealthy guest arrived, expecting a display of the mistress's usual grandeur. Laya oversaw the preparations, making subtle adjustments. The silver polished to a mirror sheen, the flowers arranged at exact angles, the table settings correct, but with small flourishes of her own. When the mistress, flustered and distracted, attempted to rearrange the centerpiece, Laya intervened politely, suggesting a better arrangement. The guest's praise was effusive, and the mistress could do nothing but watch as the attention and admiration flowed toward Laya, who stood quietly by, appearing only to assist. The mistress's cheeks burned, her hands trembled, and for the first time she felt a pang of jealousy, not of another woman's beauty, but of another's command over the room. That night, the mistress retreated to her quarters, trembling with frustration. Laya followed, as though by accident, offering to fetch water or adjust the candlelight. The mistress snapped, demanding she leave. Laya bowed slightly, acquiescing, but her mind was already working on the next step. The following morning, Laya began to consolidate her influence. She took control of the household ledger, knowing who owed what, who was owed, and how to manipulate the staff through incentives or subtle threats. She intercepted correspondence from distant relatives, choosing which letters to deliver and which to delay. She moved unseen, unheard, yet always in control. The mistress's anger grew, but her actions were increasingly disjointed. She attempted to assert authority, only to find that the servants no longer responded as they once had. They looked to Laya for guidance, followed her subtle cues, and complied with her suggestions before the mistress could even finish speaking. One afternoon, the mistress confronted Laya openly, her voice sharp, her posture rigid. "You've been undermining me," she said. "I can see it in the staff. I can feel it in the house. Tell me, how have you managed to make this place your own?" Laya remained calm, her face serene, her tone soft. "I serve the house, ma'am," she replied, "and the house needs order, patience, and care. I merely ensure that it functions as it should." The mistress's eyes narrowed, searching for deceit, for a flaw, but Laya's composure was flawless.
Every gesture, every word, every pause was designed to disarm. The mistress could find no weakness, no error, no trace of malice. That night, the mansion settled into uneasy silence. Laya moved through the rooms, checking on every corner, every lock, every whisper of the staff. She knew that the final act of her control required patience. The mistress could not be rushed. Authority could not be seized with force. It had to be cultivated, nurtured, and drawn from the very fear and admiration of those around her. In the days that followed, Laya's influence became undeniable. The mistress's instructions were carried out only when filtered through Laya's guidance. Guests praised her efficiency and grace. Servants followed her commands before even acknowledging the mistress. Laya's name became synonymous with competence, power, and subtle authority. And the mistress, once the unquestioned ruler of the household, could only watch as her power slipped through her fingers. She began to whisper rumors among the staff, casting doubt on Laya's motives. But the seeds of trust had already been sown too deeply. Laya had become the invisible hand that shaped every event, every decision, every breath of the mansion. One evening, the mistress, exhausted and resigned, approached Laya quietly. "I can no longer manage this house alone," she admitted. "Teach me, help me see what you see." Laya smiled gently, as though indulging a child, and nodded. "You already have the eyes, ma'am. You just need to open them fully." And with that, the final barrier fell. Laya had transformed the household from the shadows, guiding every action, every thought, every plan. The mansion, once ruled by fear and strict command, now bent to the subtle, precise influence of a mind that understood patience, manipulation, and quiet power better than anyone else had ever dared. The mistress had learned too late that control is not taken. It is given unknowingly to those who know how to wait. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees as if the house itself exhaled. Laya, standing in the hallway, allowed herself a small, private smile. She had won without overt violence, without anger, without force. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word had been her weapon. And now the mansion was hers. Years had passed since the night the mistress finally admitted her own limits, and Laya took full control of the household. Time had a way of softening memory, but it had sharpened Laya's influence, embedding her presence in every corner of the mansion, as though she had always belonged there. The rooms, once echoing with the mistress's rigid commands, now hummed with quiet efficiency, the air carrying the rhythm of an order only Laya could orchestrate. The staff, now fully aligned with her, moved with precision, anticipating needs before they were spoken. Each servant carried a piece of Laya's careful instruction, each gesture a reflection of her patience, her foresight, and her unwavering understanding of human nature. Even the children of the household, once spoiled and willful, found themselves guided with a firm but gentle hand, their lessons delivered subtly, never harshly, always steering them toward respect and awareness. The mistress, older and softened by the years, had learned a new form of coexistence. She no longer sought to dominate or command. Instead, she relied entirely on Laya's judgment, trusting the woman who had silently seized control, not with cruelty, but with intellect and poise. There were moments when the mistress felt pangs of resentment, fleeting memories of the power she once wielded. But those were brief, fading quickly into admiration, even dependence.
She realized that her former authority had been hollow, easily fractured, while Laya's mastery was quiet, enduring, and absolute. Word of Laya's competence had spread quietly beyond the mansion's walls. Neighbors remarked on the household's transformation, wondering how one woman could command such respect without ever raising her voice or asserting herself openly. Some whispered skeptically that she was more than she appeared, an almost supernatural intelligence guiding every action. Yet no one could pinpoint the source of the harmony within those walls. Laya herself never spoke of it. She simply acted, observed, and corrected, leaving no trace of her methods, only the results. At night, when the house fell silent and only the distant crickets and rustling leaves remained, Laya would walk through the halls, inspecting, adjusting, and planning. Every book aligned on its shelf, every candle snuffed and trimmed perfectly, every lock checked and double-checked. It was a quiet dominion, unseen yet undeniable. She had mastered the art of influence, of power without overt display, shaping lives with subtlety rather than force. The mansion itself seemed to acknowledge her presence. The walls, polished and maintained, reflected her exacting eye. The gardens bloomed in symmetry and order, every flower placed with purpose. Even the servants' laughter and hushed conversations carried her rhythm. Laya had turned a home into a living organism, each part responsive to her will, yet unaware of the full extent of her dominion. Visitors came and went, often leaving in awe of the household's smooth operation. They praised the mistress, assuming her hand had maintained such excellence. Yet behind every seamless action was Laya's guiding touch. No one suspected the subtle maneuvers, the quiet corrections, the invisible control that had reshaped not only the household, but the very way its inhabitants viewed themselves and each other. The mistress, finally at peace with her role, sometimes watched Laya from the staircase, noting the calm authority in her every movement, the quiet confidence that demanded no affirmation. It was not resentment she felt, but a recognition of genius. Laya had achieved what the mistress had never understood. True power did not come from titles, inheritance, or force. It came from foresight, patience, and the ability to shape the world without ever appearing to do so. And Laya, for her part, never flaunted her dominance. She had learned the art of invisibility and command, the strength of subtlety, and the impact of quiet intelligence. The mansion, the family, the staff, all were extensions of her mind, her careful planning, her unwavering patience. Each day she maintained the delicate balance, never tipping too far, never revealing the full scope of her control, ensuring that harmony and her own quiet supremacy would endure. Decades later, when the house had grown into legend, children in the surrounding village whispered about the woman who ruled without a word, who could move a room's inhabitants with a glance or a nod. Some said she was a ghost. Others swore she was alive and wiser than any mortal. Scholars and visitors tried to uncover her methods, but none succeeded. Laya had ensured that the power she wielded could not be traced, only felt. A legacy of influence that would outlast even the mansion itself. And so the house remained, immaculate, ordered, humming with invisible energy. The mistress lived out her days in comfort and reliance, finally understanding the lesson Laya had taught without a word. True authority is unseen, shaping the world silently, leaving only perfection in its wake. In the quiet of the night, Laya would pause by the window, looking out over the garden she had transformed, the staff she had guided, and the family she had reshaped. A faint smile touched her lips. She had won without force, without anger, without cruelty. Every detail had been deliberate, every moment calculated, every life touched. The mansion, once ruled by fear and pride, had found its true master, and she would remain its sovereign forever.